"You're not staying here after tonight." That's what my father said on Christmas Eve, while the ham dried out and no one looked up from their plates. No one asked where I'd go. No one offered a box, a coat, not even a glance. And just like that, I was no longer the daughter who paid the bills, fixed the heater, and wrapped every gift by hand. I became the silence between fork clinks. The lights they forgot wouldn't stay on without me. But I didn't shout. I didn't slam a door. I simply placed the keys on the table and walked into the snow. If you've ever felt like the backbone of a family that only remembers you when things fall apart, leave me a 1 in the comments. If not, count yourself lucky and leave a 0, because sometimes the ones who keep everything running are the first to be written out. Christmas was 2 days away, and the house felt colder than the snow outside. The heater rattled like an old man clearing his throat, but the chill never quite left the living room. I had just finished wiping down the kitchen counters when I caught sight of the TV, its blue glow bouncing off my father's glasses. He didn't acknowledge me, didn't even flinch when I passed by to adjust the thermostat. Cynthia, my mother, but I've long since stopped calling her that, was draping the red and green tablecloth over the dining table like it was an altar, a ritual, hollow and repetitive. Dean stared at his phone, headphones in, not part of any conversation. My Aunt Lorraine once told me, "People who rely on you too long forget you're a person." I didn't realize she was warning me. Not until I found myself becoming a shadow in my own home, not seen unless something broke or bills came due. The goal for today was simple: make the house feel like Christmas. At least that's what Cynthia said when she tossed me a box of Tangled lights this morning, without even making eye contact. I fixed the faulty radiator in the hallway, replaced the batteries in the smoke detector, and checked the water bill, which, like the others, came in my name. Still, nobody asked where the money came from. Outside, snow drifted in lazy circles, softening the edges of everything. But inside, the tension was sharp. Every motion I made felt like an intrusion. "You should be focusing on your own life," Dad said out of nowhere, his eyes never leaving the screen. News anchors were talking about record cold fronts and gas prices. I stared at him, the weight of the unpaid utility bills suddenly heavier. "I am," I replied, quieter than I intended. In the kitchen, Cynthia pulled out a tray of cookies she'd meant to bake, but the oven was cold. She'd forgotten to turn it on. I turned the knob without a word. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did and chose not to. I remembered being 15 and spending a summer with Lorraine. It was when Dad and Cynthia were constantly yelling, and I needed an escape. Lorraine let me sleep in, asked me what music I liked, and never once made me feel like an obligation. It was the only time in my life I felt truly visible. Later that afternoon, I glanced at the fridge and saw the list, handwritten and magnet-clipped. "Holiday budget," it read in Cynthia's cursive. Under gifts, Dean's name appeared 3 times, hers twice. Mine wasn't there. I ran my finger down the list, hoping I'd missed it. "Someone must have missed it," Cynthia said from behind, still fluffing the cushions. The words didn't sting as much as the tone. Casual, as if forgetting me had become a family habit. Dinner was reheated pot roast from 2 nights ago. I poured myself a glass of water while Dean microwaved his plate and left the sink full of dishes. I washed them after he left the room. No one noticed. At some point that evening, I tried adjusting the living room lamp. It flickered and went out completely. I went down to the basement and swapped out the bulb with one I'd bought weeks ago, out of my own paycheck. The moment I flipped the switch and the warm light returned to the room, Dad muttered, "Finally!" without looking up. The TV continued to chatter in the background. Another winter storm warning, another cold front, another reminder of how thin the walls were, not just the ones made of drywall and studs, but the emotional ones we'd each built, slowly, year after year. I walked past the living room window and paused. The reflection in the glass caught me off guard. I didn't look like someone in her own home. I looked like a guest, quiet, helpful, tolerated. Dean passed by behind me, phone still in hand, and didn't say a word. I thought of Lorraine again, and her small house with its creaky porch and lemon tea that always smelled too strong but tasted just right. I remembered sitting at her kitchen table and telling her about a poem I'd written. She said it made her cry. In a good way. No one here even knew I wrote. I climbed the stairs slowly, each creak a small protest. In my room, I sat on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Snow continued to fall outside, muffling the world. I looked at the house, leaning slightly like it was tired of holding us together. No one asked what I wanted for Christmas. I stopped asking too. The dining room smelled faintly of cloves and overcooked ham. The table was set. Cynthia had used the good plates, the ones with the faint green ivy pattern around the rim, but no one made a comment. The only sound was the gentle buzz of the Christmas lights blinking behind us, their rhythm just slightly off. I moved through the room like smoke, refilling water glasses no one thanked me for, folding napkins that would go untouched. Last year, I'd wrapped each gift with precision. Satin ribbons, handwritten tags, tiny pine cones glued with care. This year, I bought nothing. Not out of bitterness, just exhaustion. And no one noticed. The absence of my effort went unspoken, like everything else in this house. Dinner was quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't beg to be broken. Dean was picking at his food, eyes locked on the untouched yams like they held secrets. Cynthia offered him more stuffing. He didn't respond. Walter chewed methodically, his knife scraping too loudly against the plate. The roast was dry, and the bread had gone hard. I looked at them, these people I shared walls with, and suddenly felt foreign, like I'd wandered into the wrong family's celebration, and no one had the heart to tell me. "I've been looking for a place," I said, not raising my voice. Forks paused. Walter set his wine glass down with an audible clink. The lights blinked red, red, green, red. "Then it's time," he said, eyes still fixed on the centerpiece. 3 crooked candles surrounded by fake holly. There it was. No drama, no shouting, just precision, a cut clean through. I waited, just for a second, to see if anyone would argue. Cynthia dabbed her mouth with a napkin. Dean didn't lift his head. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the spare key I'd carried on my ring for 12 years, and placed it gently on the table beside my plate. Cynthia's voice floated across the table, soft and rehearsed. "You'll land on your feet." That was it. No protest. No "what will you do?" Just space where concern might have lived. I stood up slowly, the legs of my chair scraping against the floorboards like a farewell. My coat hung by the door, and I moved to retrieve it without looking back. "You're not staying here after tonight," Walter said, final and unbending. "Have you ever realized you were never really welcome, not even on the days meant for family? If you've felt that quiet kind of exile, drop a comment number 7. You're not alone. Now, let's keep going." There was no point in responding. I slipped into my coat, noting how the hallway light flickered above me. Another bulb I'd probably replaced. I looked down at my shoes. They weren't winter boots, just worn flats. But I kept moving. I didn't pack. I didn't cry. I didn't slam a door or demand an apology. I walked out into the cold with nothing but the sound of snow crunching beneath me. The air outside bit at my cheeks, but it felt more honest than the warmth inside had. I remembered Christmas when I was 8. I'd spent the whole week drawing cards for everyone, little scribbles with stick figure Santas and stars. I gave them out with shy pride. Cynthia gave me a one-armed hug and said, "You're sweet, Ellie," then turned to fix Dean's collar. I didn't know it then, but that was the first time I felt the ache of being seen through, not seen. The snow came down harder now, flakes clinging to my coat sleeves. I had no plan, no suitcase, no goodbye. But somehow, that felt more mine than anything I'd owned in that house. I walked until the glow of the house was a blur behind me, a flickering mirage in the falling dark. I passed the neighbor's lawn. The Wilkinses had gone all out again this year. Inflatable reindeer, twinkling icicles, a mechanical Santa that waved every 5 seconds. I stood there for a moment, absurdly grateful for its constancy. It blinked and whirred, uncaring and over the top, but at least it meant something to someone. The cold was creeping into my shoes. I didn't have gloves. The night pressed in around me, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't suffocating. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. A message from my boss. "Merry Christmas, Ellie. Hope you're resting." I smiled painfully. The only person who remembered I existed didn't share my last name. I wandered toward Main Street. The coffee shop on the corner was still open for holiday hours. Inside, yellow light spilled onto the sidewalk. I pushed the door open, letting the warmth wash over me. "Ellie?" The barista looked up. It was Rachel from high school. We hadn't spoken since graduation, but her voice held no judgment, just recognition. "Hot chocolate?" she asked. I nodded. She handed it to me without charging. "Merry Christmas," she said, like it mattered. I sat near the window, watching the snow layer over the empty sidewalks. A child pressed his nose to the glass from outside, laughing at something his father said. I wondered what it felt like to laugh like that on Christmas Eve. I pulled a napkin from the dispenser and started to draw. My fingers still remembered how to sketch stars and crooked trees. I thought of that old card from when I was 8, and for the first time in years, I let myself miss who I used to be. Maybe tomorrow I'll find somewhere to sleep, maybe not. But tonight I was nobody's burden, nobody's shadow, just a woman with a hot drink and time to feel the quiet settle. And that somehow felt like enough. I left without packing, without noise, like fog lifting. The lights stayed on because of me. No one ever asked how. Christmas mornings smelled different in the new place. Real butter and something like cinnamon, probably from the bakery downstairs. The radiator clanked sporadically, groaning like it hadn't been touched in years. I hadn't set an alarm, but I was awake before the sun created the rooftops of Maple Street. The apartment was small, a single room with a twin bed, a desk that wobbled, and a stove older than I was. Still, it was mine. Every bill had my name on it, and only my name. I sat cross-legged on the laminate floor, wrapped in a cardigan I hadn't worn in years. It still smelled like cedar and the attic of Aunt Lorraine's house. My laptop hummed beside me as I opened the spreadsheet. Column after column, month after month, utility bills, subscriptions, grocery store runs, just this once. What started as help had become a habit, then an expectation. Today, I was undoing all of it. The cursor blinked on the screen, waiting. I hovered over the first row. Internet. The account was under my name, automatically deducted each month. I called the company, waited on hold with the kind of patient numbness I'd perfected over the years. "Cancel," I said. "Effective immediately." Electric, gas, water. Each call peeled away a layer of me I hadn't realized was still stuck back there. Somewhere between the second and third call, Harper texted, "You good?" I stared at it for a while before replying, "Getting there." The radiator hissed again. I stood up and walked to the tiny kitchen nook. For the first time in years, I brewed real coffee. Not the instant stuff I used to make at home, quietly, before everyone else woke up. I ground the beans by hand, breathing in their sharp scent. The small act felt revolutionary. I poured myself a cup, sat down again, and opened the folder marked Ellie Home Finances. So many tabs, notes, color codes. Every time Dean forgot a password, every time Mom asked if the gas bill went up, my answers had come from here. And now I was erasing it. I didn't save a backup. I didn't drag the folder to an external drive. I just hit delete. Empty trash. It felt empty at first. Then a different kind of full. The lamp on the bedside table, a chipped porcelain one I'd taken from Grandma's attic years ago, cast a warm golden hue across the room. It had survived 4 moves and 2 almost breakups. I hadn't planned to bring it this time, but when I saw it on the shelf in the garage, dusty and forgotten, I knew it belonged in the new space. I turned it on now, the same way Grandma used to do when she didn't want to wake anyone, but needed the comfort of light. That lamp had seen me through more than I'd ever admitted. I opened a can of chicken noodle soup and let it simmer on the stove. The smell, combined with the coffee and faint bakery sweetness, turned the tiny apartment into something close to sanctuary. I sat on the floor with the bowl cupped in my hands, steam rising to meet my face. I didn't cry. Not even when I saw the time-stamped texts begin to roll in. Mom, did you change the gas password? Dean, Wi-Fi's off. No mention of Christmas. No, where are you? Not even a Merry Christmas. I didn't answer. I stared at the blinking notification until it stopped, then put the phone face down. Later that afternoon, I opened a worn envelope I had tucked inside my journal. It held an old holiday drawing I made when I was 8, a lopsided Christmas tree and 4 smiling stick figures. To Mom, Dad, Dean, and Ellie. It read in uneven pencil. I remembered the moment I gave it to them, how Mom had smiled politely, patted my head, and tucked it behind the cookie jar, never to be seen again. Now it was back with me. And it meant more here. I taped it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a cardinal, the kind Grandma used to keep on her metal cabinets. That night, the radiator finally settled into a rhythm. The lamp glowed steadily. My coffee cup sat half full beside me, and my phone remained silent. I was not angry, not bitter, just empty in a way that made room for something else. Maybe peace. After dinner, if you could call soup from a canned dinner, I washed the single bowl in the sink. The tap sputtered, then ran warm. No one else had paid for that water but me. It was mine. The act felt like closing a tab that had been open too long. I curled up in bed wearing socks that didn't match and pulled the blanket up to my chin. Outside, snow dusted the window ledge. I imagined the house back home, where no one noticed I was gone, where the heat likely sputtered once they realized whose name paid the gas. I thought of Aunt Lorraine again. How, that one summer, she'd let me rearrange all the furniture in the guest room just because I said it felt more me that way. I'd never known an adult to listen like that before. Or since. Before turning off the lamp, I looked around the room once more. It wasn't perfect, but every inch belonged to me. There were no ghosts here, just quiet. Not the silence of resentment or expectation, but the kind that allowed space to breathe, to dream, to begin again. And that night, for the first time in as long as I could remember, I dreamed of nothing at all. Just peace. The next day, Dean texted, "Wi-Fi's off." I didn't answer. 3 days after Christmas, a card showed up at my work. No return address, just my name, and a photo I wasn't in. The envelope was cream-colored, the kind used for invitations or condolences. It sat quietly on the break room table at the pharmacy where I worked the closing shift, tucked beneath the register tape and a forgotten holiday mug. My name was written in careful cursive, but no return address, no stamp, just placed there intentionally. Inside was a photograph. My father, mother, and Dean sat at our old dining table, the one with a groove down the middle from years of forced gratitude. They weren't smiling, not really. The overhead light cast a yellow pallor on everything. A roast sat untouched in the center. Someone, probably Mom, had folded the napkins into little triangles. There was a single sentence on the back, written in familiar script. "You're still part of this family." I stared at it for a long time. It didn't feel like an invitation. It felt like a statement, or a threat. Once, I used to make all the holiday cards, tweaking layouts at midnight, fixing printer jams with butter knives, handwriting each name like it meant something. Nobody ever asked how they got there. That year, when I was 27, I'd written them notes, personal ones, thoughtful ones. "Thank you for showing up for me," I wrote in Dean's. "Even if you didn't know how?" He never opened it. Mom asked if I'd seen where the stamps were, and Dad never mentioned it. I tore the photo down the middle. Then I folded the part with the note and tucked it into my coat pocket. A reminder, not a keepsake. Work dragged. The pharmacy heater hummed louder than usual. Outside, ice glistened on parked cars. My apartment key pressed into my thigh from my coat pocket. An anchor. That evening, back home, the radiator clicked to life on its own. I set a pot of water to boil, not for tea, but to warm the air. The apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon from the candle Harper gave me, and lavender from the hand lotion I'd started using, just to feel like I was caring for something again. I baked cookies that night. The old family recipe was stored in my phone, a scanned image of Mom's handwriting. I used it like a scaffolding, but changed nearly everything. Less sugar, a hint of ginger instead of clove. When I tasted one, I didn't think of her. I thought of how quiet the kitchen was. It was a silence I had earned. The phone buzzed while I was rinsing the baking sheet. Harper. "Hey," she said, gentle as ever. "You okay?" I hesitated. "I got a photo today." There was a pause. "Are you in it?" I laughed once. No. She didn't push. That was Harper's way. She asked questions like planting seeds, not pulling roots. "I just wanted to check in," she added. "Also, I saw Lorraine today." I sat down on the floor with a towel-wrapped cookie in hand. "What?" "She was at the pharmacy. Said she saw your dad there, too. He was struggling with something, prescription insurance or payment. She didn't know the full story." That made me pause. Dad, fumbling in public? It didn't align with the man who always knew how to fix the thermostat or intimidate the guy at the hardware store. I imagined him under the bright lights of the drugstore, reading the labels like a foreign language. Would he ask for help? Would he even know how? That image stayed with me as I washed the mixing bowl. It wasn't pity that settled over me. It was clarity. They weren't invincible. They never had been. And all this time, I'd been patching holes in a house that refused to admit it was falling apart. I lit the porcelain lamp again. Its light reflected off the window, faint and steady. Later, as the candle burned low and the warmth of the cookies faded, I found myself standing at the kitchen counter, staring at the folded photo note. I unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was undeniably my mother's. Slanted, slightly rushed. "You're still part of this family." The words held no apology, no acknowledgement, just a flat line of claim, like I was an object to be placed back on a shelf. I thought back to a Christmas morning when I was 12. I had saved up for weeks, folding napkins at the church potluck and babysitting the neighbor's twins. I'd bought my mother a lavender scarf. When she opened it, she smiled politely and said, "Oh, just what I needed." She never wore it. Later that winter, I found it in the linen closet, still in its plastic sleeve. That's how it always was. My efforts placed gently aside, tucked behind the cookie jar of convenience, never outright rejected, but never embraced either. I folded the note again, this time more carefully. I placed it inside a book I was reading, one I'd chosen for myself, not because someone recommended it. Between chapters, between lives, it could rest, and so could I. Later that night, Harper called back. "They're hoping you'll come home for New Year's," she said. I didn't answer right away. I looked around the apartment, the cookies cooling on a paper towel, the small folded note still in my coat pocket, the radiator humming like a distant friend. "They're hoping I'll fix the lights," I said. Dean stood at my door like a broken package, marked fragile but never handled with care. It was the last afternoon of the year, and the light outside was the kind of gray that seemed to pull everything down with it. My apartment smells faintly of leftover ginger cookies and old radiator heat. I just finished folding the blanket over the back of the couch when I heard the knock. I knew it was him before I opened the door. There's a rhythm to certain presences. You can feel them before they speak. Dean stood in his too thin jacket, hair damp from mist. He didn't look cold, just uncomfortable, like he didn't want to be seen standing there too long. I didn't say anything. I stepped aside and let him in, mostly because I didn't want the neighbors hearing anything if this turned loud. It didn't. He stood just inside the doorway, hands deep in his pockets, eyes scanning the place like it might dissolve if he stared too hard. I stayed near the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "They're struggling," he said finally. "Mom's lighting candles again." I shrugged. "So?" He blinked like I'd slapped him. "You're letting it fall apart just to make a point." There it was, the line they'd decided on. Not a request, a rebuke. I almost laughed. "You really think that's what this is?" I asked. Dean didn't answer. He looked down, then at the radiator like it might back him up. I walked to the cabinet, poured water into the kettle, let the sound of it fill the silence. "You remember last February?" I asked, voice even. He frowned. "You needed $3,200. You said it was tuition, said your scholarship was late." He didn't meet my eyes. "I wired it that night," I continued. "Skipped my therapy appointment. Paid interest on my credit card for 6 months. Never told anyone." Dean pressed his lips together, pulled something from his coat, a check. Blank. I didn't move. "I don't want your apology," I said. "And I'm not cashing that." He looked genuinely confused. "Then what do you want?" I set the kettle down without boiling it. Walked over until I was close enough to see the crack in the corner of his glasses. Same one he never fixed in high school. "I didn't let anything fall," I said softly. "I stopped bleeding to hold it up." Have you ever kept everything from falling apart, quietly, painfully, while everyone else pretended not to notice? If that's ever been your role, drop a comment, number 9. I see you. Let's see how this ends. He stood there, holding the check like it might turn into a bridge if he kept gripping it hard enough. "You know," I said, "the worst part wasn't even the money. It was knowing if I died the next day, nobody would have known what I gave up." Dean swallowed. He didn't argue, didn't explain. I thought about a morning last year, how he'd come home shaking, sure he'd lose his scholarship. I'd laid a hand on his shoulder, said, "I'll fix it." He didn't ask how. I didn't offer details. It just became my job. Now I didn't reach for him. Dean didn't leave right away. He stood by the door, fingers twitching at the hem of his jacket. I wondered if he was waiting for me to soften, to tell him it was okay, that none of it had mattered. But I had no more performances left. It wasn't just the $3,200, I said, not for him, but to air the truth. It was every time Mom needed prescriptions filled and couldn't reach her wallet, every overdue bill I paid before the lights shut off, every birthday gift signed from all of us when only I paid. Dean looked older than I remembered, not in age, but in weight, carrying something he didn't know how to name. "I didn't see it," he murmured. "You didn't want to," I replied. "None of you did. I was convenient." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing half a step before stopping. "So what happens now? We just stop being family?" I thought about that. The word family had always been their excuse, their trump card. But family without accountability is just a habit of proximity. "You'll always be my brother," I said, "but I'm not the Ned anymore." The radiator hissed softly. Outside, wind brushed against the windows, steady and tired. Dean nodded slowly, then opened the door. He didn't say goodbye, just stepped out into the dusk like he had somewhere to go, but no idea how to get there. I closed the door behind him, locking it not out of fear, but clarity. Later, I took out the folder where I used to keep every receipt, every budget spreadsheet, every emergency plan. I placed his check inside, not to cash, just to remember. To remind myself of the currency I used to trade in: silence, sacrifice, invisibility. And then I made tea, real tea, loose leaf, not a bag. I let it steep the full 4 minutes, no rush. That night, I sat on the couch with a blanket around my shoulders and watched the lights on my tiny thrift store tree flicker gently. No one knew they were still on. No one had asked. But I did. I asked myself what I needed, and for the first time, I answered. "They're thinking about selling the house," Dean had said. "Let them learn what a roof really costs," I replied. Spring has come. The basil lived. And so did I. The frost disappeared in patches, retreating like something embarrassed it stayed too long. March had crept in quiet, not with declarations, but with a slow warmth that touched the windowsill and stayed. The basil I'd thought wouldn't survive the January drafts had sprung 2 new leaves. I caught myself smiling at it, like it was a child that had spoken its first word. That morning, the mail brought a plain envelope. My name, in handwriting too formal to be a mistake, but without a return address. I opened it without a hurry. Inside, a photocopy of an old utility bill, the electricity account in my name, red circled like a spotlight on my signature. No note, no explanation, no apology. I folded it twice, slid it into the bottom drawer of the nightstand. No one deserved more of my time today. Harper came by around noon, carrying a thermos and a mischievous grin. "Chicken soup," she announced, "with the good time." "You mean the kind that doesn't ask you for a receipt?" I joked. She laughed and set the pot on the stove, flipping through my music stack like she lived there. Nina Simone played softly as she stirred, her foot tapping in time, her smile undemanding. "You're glowing," she said, not looking at me. "I didn't say happy. I said glowing." I leaned against the counter. "I'll take it." Outside, kids kicked a ball between parked cars. The bakery downstairs had reopened, its window panes still a bit foggy, but the scent of cinnamon and yeast was back in the air. The world was, improbably, still spinning. And so was I. I found the old key later that day, the one to my parents' house. still scratched where I dropped it on the sidewalk years ago. I wrapped it in brown paper, added the folded copy of the bill, sealed them both in an envelope with no return name. The walk to the post box was short, the drop, quiet. There was nothing more to say. I didn't check if they received it. I didn't wonder how they'd react. That wasn't the point. Later that evening, I took the lamp from the corner table, my grandmother's, the one with the ceramic base shaped like tulips, and placed it by the window. Its cord had once sparked, needing a fix I never had time to give. I rewrote it last week. It turned on with a single click. No flicker. Just light. Mine. That night, while Harper washed dishes humming quietly, I watered the basil again. The soil was just damp enough. I remembered when it first wilted, leaves curling, stems soft. I nearly tossed it, but something told me to wait. Now it reached up, soft green defiance. I sat on the windowsill, knees pulled close, lamp glowing beside me. I watched the street. A couple strolled by, sharing earbuds. A teenager biked past, backpack swinging. The normalcy felt sacred. My thoughts drifted. Not to them, but to me. Every night, I'd waited for a kind word. Every time I'd reheated dinners gone cold. Every email I sent, bill I paid, favor I offered, smile I forced. For years, I'd believed love meant staying, fixing, giving, even when it emptied me. But not anymore. I thought of Aunt Lorraine's words, the ones that echoed each time I almost bent again. People who rely on you too long forget you're a person. I wasn't a fixture anymore. I was not a fuse, a switch, a backup generator. I was someone with morning light on her face, soup on the stove, and leaves turning toward her hands. I didn't light candles that night. I didn't pray for answers or ache for closure. I just sat, feeling the warmth of my own lamp, knowing I'd paid for every watt of peace that filled the room. And when I looked at the basil one last time before sleep, I smiled. Not because it lived, but because I finally did too. I used to believe that if I gave enough, time, money, silence, something would shift. That love would finally recognize me. But now I see, walking away wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, the first honest thing I ever did for myself. I've come to believe that forgiveness isn't always about reunion. It's about release. And peace, it turns out, doesn't always come from being held. Sometimes it arrives the moment you stop holding on. If any part of my story felt familiar or made you pause, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear how your story unfolded too. And if you'd like more stories like this, consider subscribing to stay connected. Thank you for listening. I'll see you again in the next story.